I'm Evelyn Warner, and the foundation of my life crumbled on an ordinary Thursday evening. Richard, my husband of 15 years, sauntered in not alone but with Clara, a young woman barely 23, latched onto his arm. Clara wore a smirk that clashed with the familiarity of our home. Richard wasted no time in dropping the bombshell. I'm divorcing you, Evelyn. Clara will be staying here. This house is hers, he declared, his voice devoid of the warmth I once knew. Disbelief and confusion churned within me as my heart raced. I'd heard of such betrayals, but never imagined I'd be the victim. The calm I felt was more shock than composure. You can't be serious, I managed, my voice a mere whisper. Richard's laugh, once familiar, now sounded foreign. Oh, I am very serious. It's been a long time coming. You just never saw it, he taunted, with Clara echoing his arrogance. The scene felt surreal, like a nightmare. Yet the chill in Richard's eyes was all too real. The man I'd shared my life with, the father of our child, had become a stranger. So this is it. You're discarding our marriage, our family, for her? I questioned, bitterness tainting my words. Don't be dramatic, Evelyn. Clara understands me, unlike you, Richard retorted, each word a knife to my heart. Amidst the pain, clarity emerged. Richard revealed his true colors, and they were ugly. You're willing to throw everything away for a fling? I challenged, my voice steady now. It's more than that. Clara is my future, and you're just the past. Richard dismissed, his words cutting deep. I glanced at Clara, young enough to be our daughter, caught in what she believed was love. But I saw it for what it was, a midlife crisis, a heartless game. Fine, I declared, resolve replacing shock. You want a divorce? You'll get it. But remember, Richard, this house is as much mine as yours. I won't go down without a fight. As they walked away, disgust rippled through me, not just at their betrayal, but at my own blindness. This wasn't the end. It was the start of my battle. For dignity, for my child, for what was rightfully mine. In the days that followed, emotions engulfed me. Memories of our life together, now tainted by Richard's betrayal, consumed my thoughts. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, haunted by visions of him and Clara, their laughter a cruel echo. But amidst the turmoil, a plan took shape. I refused to let Richard walk away unscathed. This wasn't merely about a house or a marriage. It was about justice. I was determined to make him rue the day he thought he could discard me like yesterday's newspaper. I sought out the most formidable divorce lawyer in town, someone renowned for their ruthless efficiency. As I recounted my situation, Miss Johnson, the lawyer, listened intently, her eyes sharpening with each detail. Richard thinks he can just replace you and walk away with everything. Not on my watch, she declared, her tone dripping with determination. Together, we delved into the legalities, and it soon became apparent that Richard had underestimated me. The house, which he arrogantly promised to Clara, was partly mine by law. Moreover, the land it stood on, inherited from my father and solely in my name, gave Richard no claim whatsoever. Armed with this knowledge, I felt a surge of power for the first time since his betrayal. I was in control, ready to turn the tables on him, catching him off guard. Miss Johnson meticulously drafted the divorce papers, ensuring that my rights took center stage. But it wasn't just about the legal battle. It was personal. Richard's betrayal had wounded me deeply, and I was poised to reciprocate. I relished the thought of seeing the shock on his face when he realized the house he intended to bestow upon his mistress was not his to give. This was only the beginning. I intended to strike Richard where it hurt the most, his ego, his pride, his very essence. Nothing was off limits. He may have initiated this war, but I was resolute in finishing it. As I signed the divorce papers, a sense of vindication washed over me, propelling me forward with unwavering determination. A whirlwind of emotions swept through me, a blend of sadness and determination. The life I once knew had ended. But a new chapter beckoned, one where I held the pen, and Richard was merely a cautionary tale in my narrative. Filing the divorce papers marked a pivotal moment. With a heart racing with both fear and exhilaration, I submitted the documents, acknowledging the point of no return. Emerging from the courthouse, a weight lifted from my shoulders. No longer a pawn in Richard's cruel game, I now stood as the protagonist in my pursuit of justice. Meeting with Miss Johnson later, we strategized our next steps in her office, sunlight casting long shadows across the floor. Richard's going to fight dirty, Evelyn. You need to be prepared, Miss Johnson cautioned, her eyes grave with concern. I know, I replied, steeling myself. But there's something he doesn't know about the land this house sits on. It's mine, inherited from my father. Miss Johnson's eyes sparked with recognition. That changes everything. He can't claim the house without the land. We can serve him an eviction notice. The prospect of Richard and Clara facing eviction from the home they thought was theirs brought a bitter sense of satisfaction. It was more than a legal maneuver. It was a declaration of my refusal to be discarded and forgotten. Let's do it, I asserted firmly. The day the eviction notice was delivered, I envisioned the shock and fury on Richard's face. It was just the beginning of his comeuppance. For every tear shed, for every sleepless night endured, he would pay. But the battle was far from over. Fueled by his ego, Richard wouldn't surrender without a fight. His enraged voice pierced through the phone as he called me, demanding answers. Evelyn, what the hell do you think you're doing with this eviction notice? He's just reclaiming what's mine, Richard. You should have thought twice before deciding to give away something that wasn't yours, I replied, my voice calm but resolute. This is ridiculous. You're doing this to get back at me, aren't you? He accused. It's not about revenge, Richard. It's about justice. You can't just take what you want without consequences, I countered. Richard fell silent for a moment, and I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. He had underestimated me, assuming I would quietly retreat. But I was fighting back, and I wasn't going to stop until I got what was rightfully mine. This isn't over, Evelyn. I'll fight this, he finally said. Go ahead, I responded. But remember, the law is on my side, and I'm not backing down. After hanging up, I felt a surge of power. For too long, I had let Richard dictate our lives. Now, the tables were turned, and I was in control. I would not relent until justice was served. In the weeks that followed, it became a chess game of legal maneuvers and emotional confrontations. Richard, caught off guard by the eviction notice, launched into desperate attempts to sway the situation in his favor. But with each move, he only dug himself deeper into the web of his own making. One evening, as I sat in my living room, the phone rang. The caller ID flashed Richard's name, and I braced myself for another round of pleading and anger. Evelyn, you can't do this to me, to us. Richard's voice came through, tinged with frustration. Us? There's no us anymore, Richard. You made sure of that, I replied, my voice steady. This is madness. You're going to leave me homeless over some petty revenge, he argued. Petty? You call destroying our family petty? I shot back. This isn't about revenge, Richard. It's about consequences. Your actions have them, and now you're facing them. Richard's voice turned softer, almost pleading. Evelyn, please, let's talk about this. We can sort it out for old time's sake. I almost laughed. Old time's sake? As if our years together were mere tokens to be traded in times of trouble. There's nothing left to sort out, Richard. You made your choices. Now you live with them. He was silent for a moment, and I could sense his desperation mounting. You're enjoying this, aren't you? Seeing me suffer. It's not about enjoyment, Richard. It's about justice. You need to understand that every action has a consequence, and this, I paused, this is yours. I hung out before he could respond. My heart was racing, but there was a sense of empowerment in standing my ground. For too long, I had allowed Richard to dictate the terms of our life, but now the scales had tipped. I wasn't the passive wife he could easily discard. In the days that followed, the reality of his situation seemed to dawn on Richard. His calls became less frequent, his voice less assured. The man who once held all the power in our relationship was now scrambling to salvage what little remained from the ruins he had created. Clara's presence lingered in the background of this drama, a constant reminder of the catalyst for all of this. Yet, I knew her part in Richard's story was coming to an end. She was just another pawn in his game, and soon she would realize it too. As I lay awake at night, the silence of the house contrasted starkly with the chaos of my thoughts. Amidst the turmoil, there was a growing sense of clarity. I was doing the right thing, not just for myself, but for our child. In this battle of wills, I wasn't just fighting for my rights. I was fighting for our future. As the legal battle intensified, Richard's veneer of control began to crack. The house he had intended to give Clara was slipping through his fingers, along with his imagined future. His desperation became more evident with each passing day. One afternoon, as I reviewed documents from Miss Johnson, my phone buzzed with a message from Richard. It was an invitation, or rather a plea, for a meeting. Against my better judgment, I agreed. It was time to face him, not as his wife, but as the architect of his downfall. We met at a quiet cafe, a neutral ground amidst our war. Richard looked haggard, the strain of the situation etching deep lines on his face. As he saw me, his expression shifted from relief to something darker. "Evelyn, thank you for coming. We need to sort this out," he started, his voice shaky. "Sort this out? You mean find a way for you to weasel out of the consequences?" I replied coldly. He leaned forward, his eyes searching mine. "I know I've made mistakes, but this is too much. You're taking everything from me. Everything." "No, Richard. You took everything the moment you betrayed us," I asserted firmly, my resolve unyielding. "I'm taking back what's mine. You made your choice when you decided to betray our family. Now, I'm making mine," I said firmly. Richard's frustration boiled over. "You're heartless. Do you enjoy seeing me like this, struggling, begging?" I met his gaze unflinching. "Heartless? You dare call me heartless after what you've done? This isn't about enjoyment, Richard. It's about justice. You can beg all you want, but it changes nothing." He slumped back in his chair, defeated. "So what? You're going to leave me homeless, ruin me? If that's what it takes for you to understand the gravity of your actions, then yes," I said. "You thought you could discard me without any repercussions. You were wrong." Richard looked away, the reality of his situation finally dawning on him. "What about Clara?" he asked, almost as an afterthought. "Clara? She's your concern, not mine. Though I doubt she'll stick around once she realizes there's nothing left for her here," I replied as I stood up to leave. Richard reached out in a last-ditch effort to salvage something from the wreckage. "Evelyn, please," he pleaded. I pulled away. "Please? Richard, it's too late for that. You've made your bed, now you lie in it." Walking away from that cafe, I felt a surge of liberation. The chains of our marriage, once so constrictive, were now broken. I was free from Richard's betrayal, free to rebuild my life on my terms. In the wake of our meeting, Richard's attempts to sway the situation became increasingly frantic and futile. His calls, once demanding and arrogant, were now laced with desperation. The tables had turned, and he was slowly coming to terms with the magnitude of his mistakes. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, my phone rang. The familiar jingle brought an involuntary sigh. It was Richard again. Bracing myself, "Evelyn, you can't do this. We can talk about this. There has to be another way," Richard pleaded, his voice cracking. "Another way? After everything you've done, you think there's a way out for you?" I responded, incredulity lacing my words. "It's not just about me. Think about our child, Evelyn." "This affects them too," he argued, playing what he thought was his trump card. "Our child. The same child you so easily dismissed in your plans with Clara," I shot back. "No, Richard. This is about justice. This is about making sure our child knows that actions have consequences." There was a pause on the other end, a silence filled with unspoken realizations. Richard had always underestimated me, but no longer. I was no longer the woman he thought he could control and manipulate. "You're going to regret this, Evelyn. You're pushing me too far," Richard said, his voice a mixture of anger and fear. "Regret? The only regret I have is not seeing your true colors sooner. You're not being pushed too far. You're just finally being held accountable, I shot back. Richard's frustration boiled over. You think you've won, don't you? You think you can just take everything and leave me with nothing. This isn't about winning or losing, Richard. It's about righting a wrong. You made your choices, and now you live with the consequences. It's that simple, I replied firmly. The call ended with Richard's defeated silence, a stark contrast to his usual bluster. He was finally feeling the weight of his actions, the cost of his betrayal. In the following weeks, the reality of Richard's situation became increasingly apparent. His financial resources dwindled, strained by legal fees and the loss of the house. Clara, ever the opportunist, began to distance herself, her affection waning as Richard's fortunes declined. The final court hearing was a formality, a legal stamp on what was already a foregone conclusion. As I stood outside the courthouse, the decree in hand, I felt an overwhelming sense of closure. Richard's downfall was complete, a direct result of his own actions. He had sown the seeds of his destruction, and I had merely ensured they grew. Turning my back on the courthouse, my heart lighter than it had been in months, the future lay ahead, undefined but promising. I had fought for justice, for both myself and my child, and emerged victorious. The months following the divorce and Richard's eviction from the house brought profound changes. Our home, once tainted by the shadow of betrayal, slowly transformed back into a sanctuary of peace and strength for me and our child. Each room was cleansed of Richard's presence, his memories replaced by new, joyful ones. Richard's downfall continued in a downward spiral. Without the house and struggling financially, he was forced to move back in with his parents. The last I heard, Clara had left him, her affections as transient as the wealth she had hoped to secure. As I tended to the garden, a task that had become a source of solace, my phone rang. The screen flashed Richard's name, a reminder of a chapter I had firmly closed. Curiosity piqued, I answered. Evelyn, it's Richard. His voice came through subdued and almost unrecognizable. What do you want, Richard? I asked, my tone indifferent. I wanted to apologize for everything, he said, the words seemingly difficult for him to utter. Apologies don't change the past, Richard. They don't undo the hurt, I replied calmly. I know, he admitted. I've lost everything, Evelyn. Clara's gone. I'm living with my parents. I've hit rock bottom. That was your doing, Richard. You made those choices, I stated plainly. There was a heavy sigh on the other end. I know. I thought you should know. I regret it, Evelyn. I regret it all. His words laden with remorse. His apology didn't bring me the satisfaction I had once thought it would. Instead, there was a sense of finality, a closing of a chapter that had caused so much pain. Your regret is your own to live with, Richard. I've moved on. I suggest you do the same, I said, ready to end the conversation. Evelyn, he started but trailed off. There's nothing more to say, Richard. Goodbye, I said, and hung up. As I put my phone away and turned back to my garden, a sense of peace washed over me. The past was behind me, and ahead was a life filled with possibilities, a life of my own making. The garden bloomed around me, a testament to new beginnings and growth. Our child laughed in the background, a sound that filled my heart with joy. This was my world now, one where betrayal and pain had no place. Richard's chapter in my life was over, but mine was just beginning, a chapter filled with strength, resilience, and the love of those who truly mattered.